Welcome to the Sydney Catholic Schools Term 4 Family Forum. Well, we'll be focusing on the road back to face-to-face learning for our secondary schools across metropolitan Sydney. My name is Tony Farley and I'm the Executive Director of Sydney Catholic Schools. And co-presenting with me tonight is the Sydney Catholic Schools Chief of Staff, Dr. Jacqueline Frost.
Thanks, Tony. We begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we sit and from which you are joining us this evening. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging who bring such extraordinary tradition and promise to our schools and our wider community. Tonight, our prayer has been provided by the newly appointed Captain and Vice Captain of St Mary's Cathedral College.
Of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Saviour, for he has looked with favour on his lowly servant. From this day all generations will call me blessed. The Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name.
He has mercy on those who fear him in every generation. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in their conceit.
He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty.
He has come to the help of his servant Israel, for he has remembered his promise of mercy, the promise he made to our fathers, to Abraham and his children forever. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We're very aware that our parents and students are looking forward to returning to face-to-face learning, while also having many questions and concerns about how that will occur. Tonight's Family Forum is intended to answer at least some of those questions and leave you confident that the school leaders and teachers in your school have worked particularly hard to make sure the transition back is as smooth and easy as possible.
With that in mind, we thought it might be helpful if we asked you now what most concerns you about the return to school. On your screen, you'll see a live poll and you can choose any of the following which apply. So what is it? What is it that concerns you most about the return to school? Is it that your child might be exposed to COVID at school? Is it that your child may not be able to participate in the activities that could have been cancelled or changed? Is it that owing to exposures and changing circumstances, you're worried we'll be moving in and out of remote learning? Is it that your child might have trouble readjusting socially after the lockdown? Is it that your child might be behind their classmates in their learning? Is it perhaps that your child might have some trouble adjusting to the schedule and the rigour of school? Or perhaps you've got no concerns and you're ready to go and hit the ground running.
As you can see there, Jacqueline, obviously the exposure at school with COVID is a really huge issue for parents. And you can see that in those other areas, there's a generalised concern around readjusting and how that can be managed and the circumstances of moving in and out, the unpredictability of COVID. And we'll be talking about that tonight.
We will. It's really interesting because, in fact, that's quite consistent. We had our primary session just before, and that was a similar concern there. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that.
Tonight, we'll be talking to educational experts about 4 key aspects of the transition back to school. How we manage the physical environment of our schools to make them as safe as possible. How we'll manage the academic transition of our students so that every child's academic progress is assessed and managed in the best way possible. How we manage the social transition of our students' return to school, and how you as families will have to adapt to the return to school while juggling your work and family responsibilities as well. So let's start with the physical environment. Jacqueline has been managing the COVID response for all 150 Sydney Catholic schools. We meet with our school leaders every week, and much of the discussion since the government first outlined a plan for return has been about the provision of a safe work environment. So Jacqueline, let's start with this. What measures will be in place to ensure our schools are COVID safe?
Well, the first thing to understand is that our schools work with really detailed risk assessments, and those risk assessments have multiple factors that are included, and they range from things like cleaning, making sure that high-touch areas and areas where the students are transiting are cleaned on a more regular schedule, things like bathrooms and the corridors where students are. It's also about looking at personal protective equipment. So things like masks, and we know that in our secondary schools, not only will our staff be masked while they're indoors and out, but our students will be wearing masks in the classroom when we return, and they're encouraged to wear it on the playground as well when they're not eating. We also see things like sanitizers and wipes, so very similar to the first time that we came back from remote learning. We have those in abundant supply at the schools to make sure students have ready access to them. We use QR codes to make sure that we're able to track and ensure the people who are coming on and off the school site, there's a register kept of them. And wherever possible, we're really trying to distance both our students but also our staff members to make sure that people have got that area to be able to move and to learn. Really the key part though, or the last piece of the puzzle, is around vaccination as well. And for Sydney Catholic Schools, all of our staff will be doubly vaccinated when they return to school.
Now, Jacqueline, we hear a lot about ventilation, and that's very hot in the media at the moment. What's happening in our schools with ventilation?
Well, when we come to talk about ventilation, it really is one of the benefits of a system like Sydney Catholic Schools having quite a large property and facilities team. And that team has been working extensively in this space for quite a while, but particularly over the last 6 weeks as we plan the return. And what we found is that in looking at ventilation, there really is sort of a staged approach. And it was even in the media again today that when we're talking about ventilation, the very best thing you can do is get outside. I mean, that's where all the fresh air is. So our schools will be looking to see how they can move classes outside where they can, and how they can really get things into the outdoors and make use of those beautiful playground spaces that they have. The next step then is really about cross-ventilation. So we've had the facilities team going into the schools, checking those windows that may have long ago been painted shut so that we can have doors open and windows open and really get cross-ventilation in terms of the fresh air in the classroom. The next step is around really increasing the schedule of maintenance on things we already have in place, like fans and air conditioning units, making sure the filters are replaced so that ventilation is really at its peak. And then we're actually putting in some additional measures as well. So all of our schools are being issued with handheld CO2 monitors, which will be able to be used so that the school can actually track when they're seeing or they're feeling like perhaps ventilation isn't optimal. This then will be supported by having mobile air purification units that the schools can move around when and if they need them to really make sure that our students and our staff are as safe as they can be.
Okay, Jacqueline, so now our students are back at school. What will be happening at school when they come back?
Yeah, it will look a little bit different, but some of the activities that will be happening, canteen will be back up and running so that students can use that, particularly for our secondary students being able to access the canteen to get their lunch or their recess. They'll be able to do that as groups. Dance, drama and sport for cohorts, so for classes, will be taking place. Often it'll be outside, but classes and those students who study dance, so drama or PE, they'll still be able to have those lessons. And the library will be open again, so particularly for students who like to use the library before or after school to study, that'll be open as well.
Yeah, in years 11 and 12, that's particularly important, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So what activities won't be happening when they come back?
Yeah, unfortunately, there will be some activities that will be on hold when we first return. And as a general guideline, it's anything really that has a large group coming together. So things like assemblies or performances, whole school gatherings, concerts, they'll be on hold for the moment. Excursions, camps, field trips that might have been planned for term 4 will be postponed or cancelled if they can't take place. Sport, in terms of carnivals or school sport, particularly inter-school sport as we first return, won't be happening, and other inter-school activities. So lots of our schools participate in things like debating, public speaking, competitions for sport in the afternoon. Those won't be happening when we first return because lots of things are about restricting that mixing of different groups.
So the HSC commences on November 9. What measures are in place for those exams?
Well, nobody wants to see the HSC interrupted after how long the students have worked to really get ready. So the schools are doing extensive work in planning their COVID-safe exams. So the first thing is that lots of our schools are planning how they can actually section an area of the school so that Year 12s can enter and exit and really be on their own in that particular space. And in some circumstances, that will mean that our Year 7 to Year 11 students might move on and off the school site or in and out of remote learning, particularly when we have those big cohort exams like English and maths and studies of religion, when we have big groups there. This will let us spread the Year 12s out. It'll let us have the exams in smaller rooms. There's also some quite strict hygiene procedures in place for the Year 12 students when they're doing their HSC. So they will be doing the exams in masks. They'll be provided with sanitizer and wipes so that they can wipe down their desk and their chair as they start. And they'll also be screened as they're entering the exam room, just to make sure they haven't been or not being required to be in isolation. Now, all of these things are in place to really make sure there's as little disruption as possible for the students. But in the case that there is, we've got contingencies in place around alternative exam locations. So whether that's moving it to another part of the school that has been kept quarantined, or it's moving it to a local school in our area. And all of those things will be communicated to the parents and to the students in the lead up to the 9th of November.
That's one of the advantages of having a system of 150 schools, isn't it?
We can certainly work together. And last year, we got a little bit of a run at this in being able to practice and test how it would work if we moved any of our students across the exams. Thankfully, we didn't have to move a single exam.
Now, Jacqueline, every one of our schools has a site-specific safety plan. How do they work?
Well, the site-specific plans are really about mitigating any potential exposure. So the key is about using what's called a cohort model. And in our secondary schools, a cohort is really a year group because they work with that year group in their different lessons as they're moving across the timetable. And students will largely be able to return to their regular timetable. So by doing that, by keeping students in their year group on the playground and keeping them in their year group in their classes, it really limits the impact if there was an exposure on the school site. We also limit this by restricting visitors that can come onto the school site and making sure that students aren't attending school with even the slightest of symptoms. And if they are unwell, not returning to school until they've had a negative COVID test.
Jacqueline, one thing we've been doing is planning for all of the contingencies and being realistic. Have we planned? What's our plan for an exposure on site, notwithstanding all the work that we've done to mitigate?
Sure. So over the last 18 months, we have had a little bit of practice about what happens if there is an exposure on the school site. And I think it's helpful to have a bit of an understanding of what actually happens if there's a student or a staff member or somebody who's been on the school site at the same time as my child who might have tested positive to COVID. The first thing to know is that you'll receive a letter from the school which will ask you to go into isolation while we undertake the contact tracing. And this is really important because what it gives us time to do is to work with New South Wales Health and Catholic Schools New South Wales to identify where there might be contacts who might have been potentially exposed and get that information to people. So people will be put sort of into a precautionary isolation, and while we're doing that, we can clean the school and get everything ready to go. Once we've identified who the contacts are, then people are issued with a letter that give them the really clear instructions about what that means in terms of isolation and any testing that they have to undertake. Finally, I guess the one thing that we've learnt really clearly is that our teachers are great at being able to move us quickly in and out of remote learning. So even when there is an exposure on the school site, and unfortunately students have to move to remote learning for a period, our teachers are able to facilitate that really effectively.
Thanks, Jacqueline, for the excellent and very reassuring overview of our strategies in this regard. As Jacqueline has outlined, our schools are using a carefully planned approach that places the health and safety of our students, staff and communities at the centre of everything we do. We understand that situations can change rapidly in these COVID times, and we're prepared to respond effectively no matter what those changes might be.
As we saw in our first poll for this evening, not only are we thinking about the safety of our environment, but also it's understandable to be starting to think a little bit about whether or not there was any lost learning time or how we might pick that up. It's natural for parents to want to know more about how will assessment work upon return and what interventions will be available if they're needed by a particular student. So to talk us through these issues, we've invited Sydney Catholic Schools Director of System Performance, Mr. Kevin Carraher, to answer some key questions. Kevin, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
Kevin, I think the first question really is what sorts of things will teachers be doing to assess where the students are at, given that they've been in lockdown for 106 days?
Thanks. The first message is that teachers are constantly assessing where students are at in their learning to plan the way forward. We're probably most familiar with big assessment tasks in secondary school that are typically held once a term, but the more instructive assessment that our teachers are working on on are the ongoing learning activities that are designed to give them evidence of learning in targeted areas. So during remote learning, schools have been really honing how they regularly gather evidence of student learning that give them an understanding of what your child knows, understands, and can do. When they return to school, teachers will be identifying the critical outcomes or content areas that are necessary for their progress into next year. So they'll provide short, ongoing assessment in the weeks when they return to identify those gaps and to prioritise their teaching to fill those gaps. And this will ensure that every child's needs are understood and responded to.
Fantastic. I mean, secondary students are a little bit more autonomous in terms of how they prepare. So how can our secondary students ensure that they're ready to return to face-to-face learning in the next few weeks?
Yeah, we learned a lot from the return from remote learning last year, and we found that those students that reintegrated best afterwards were those who were actively engaged in the learning that was being set by the teachers throughout. Now, in the next couple of weeks, students have a great opportunity to ask questions, to check their understanding, to practice those skills that teachers are setting for them, and to ask for feedback. The students' ability to voice their concerns or maybe to express areas where they're less comfortable is particularly important. But that acting and seeking feedback is really probably one of the most important things that they can be doing. And appreciating that structure and routine is probably difficult at home, strengthening those learning structures and routines will really benefit them when they return. Some of those not so great habits that were formed probably now need some discipline work to overcome, and they include eating and exercise and sleep habits that we know make for great learning.
And possibly certainly what time we get out of bed in the morning when we're getting back into the schedule.
Definitely.
What will be the focus of learning for our secondary students when we come back, knowing that we've sort of got a little bit of a truncated timeline now?
Yeah, great question. So schools will place a lot of focus on students' emotional and social wellbeing to support the reintegration back into a structured learning environment. We want to help students just find that joy of being back in the classroom, back with their friends, and back with teachers. Teachers are preparing to focus on student skill development, and the learning will be designed to really engage students back in classroom-based learning, which is something really different. A focus on collaborative learning and where students have a lot of choice and voice will be a particular focus. But for senior students, I guess that's going to mean a dive straight back into those skills that are necessary for HSC and for post-school success. And in particular, those subject-specific skills like writing and performing and production skills that our teachers know are critical in year 11 and 12. They'll be working with students to establish effective study routines, and collaborative learning will be especially important here. For those students in the middle secondary years, we understand it's where those foundational skills for senior school are developed, and these students will really be focusing on those active learning skills, those project-based activities that really engage students and require them to think and create and articulate their learning. And in those junior years, we're acutely aware that this is where we need to focus on collaborative, hands-on activities that are allowing them to build the skills as learners and dispositions of learning that are required in each of those courses as they learn how to become, good secondary students.
So what I'm hearing from you there is it's a real balance in terms of coming back between the content and the skills, and putting those two things together.
Yeah. That's right.
In terms of our parents who are watching tonight, where our students might have been largely self-directed and working through their school day with sort of minimal intervention from their parents, as is the case for many secondary students, how can parents be assured that they haven't missed fundamental content or skills that they need to progress in their secondary education?
Yeah, I appreciate this is a significant concern for parents. Parents should really take confidence in what our teachers have been doing to ensure engagement and quality learning throughout remote learning. Our teachers have prioritised those key skills and content areas that are the must-haves for moving into next year in their particular learning areas, and in particular, those relevant literacy and numeracy skills. As a system, our schools have been actively collaborating during this time to develop and share the best possible learning opportunities that all teachers and all students should be using to get through. It's also important to understand that outcomes are taught and assessed across a stage, across 2 years. And while it's been a long lockdown, students have a much longer period of time to demonstrate their learning in different ways across this stage. Beyond the work of this term, our schools have really sophisticated methods of assessing and ensuring that the needs of each student are understood and that they're getting the support that they need.
I think that support is a really important point. So just to finish off, what are the programs that would be in place for students across our schools who might find they do need a little bit of extra intervention upon their return?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, the best intervention happens in the context of a classroom. The classroom teacher's understanding of your child's needs allow them to differentiate the learning and provide small group interventions in the context of their learning area. But for those students who require one-to-one interventions, our schools have a number of opportunities that make sure that no student is left behind. We have a range of explicit literacy and numeracy interventions provided by specialists across our schools to support students requiring those targeted interventions in reading, in writing and numeracy. But we also have the Covert intensive tutoring program that provides really targeted support for those students who have been impacted by this time.
Thanks, Kevin. That was really an excellent overview of how our schools will manage the academic side of learning during the return to school. And we really do understand that you might continue to have questions, and we want you to know we're very confident that our plan and approach will be a success.
One of the things that's been most difficult to replicate in the remote learning environment has been the social aspect of school. As we know, secondary school is an academic journey that occurs during the formative years of adolescence. For our teenagers, social media has made this time of their lives even more complicated, and without the physical presence of others at school, sometimes more problematic. To help us understand more about the social transition back to school, we've invited the principal of Good Samaritan Catholic College, Hinchinbrook, James Corcoran, to talk about how this will be supported. Welcome, James.
Good evening, Tony. How are you?
Well, a key part of secondary education is the development of social and emotional skills as our young people learn who they are. How will our schools pick this up after a term of remote learning?
I think, Tony, what we'll be aiming to do is to make learning enjoyable for the students. They describe it as fun. This has allowed us some leeway with the curriculum, so we'll be able to focus on the really key outcomes. So in different subjects, it'll mean things like doing experiments in science, a lot of practical PE, because we know students need to take advantage of our school grounds and facilities to get some exercise. Of course, in the TAS subjects, in tech, we might even find our students are demonstrating great cooking skills that they've developed throughout this lockdown period. We'll be focusing on communication skills where it's appropriate in the classwork. Students will be doing public speaking, debating, presenting to reintegrate with those skills that they might have dropped off a little bit in this remote learning period. And of course, we'll be focusing on interactions with social skills as well, so they remember how to operate and integrate with each other in larger groups. And of course, we'll be working on socialisation skills, as I said, working in smaller groups though at school in a COVID-safe way, talking about their experiences in lockdown, their feelings, and then of course we'll be building on that in our pastoral care programs.
James, will you be sharing some of your cooking skills with the staff and students?
Oh, absolutely, Tony. Chili king prawns in squid ink pasta. I'll be looking forward to sharing that with the students.
Right, I'll be coming over. We know the lockdown and isolation of our secondary students has had some concerning wellbeing implications for our students, James. How will schools be assessing and supporting students who need extra mental health and emotional support?
It's something we take very serious in Catholic schools, Tony, and certainly we'll be acknowledging with students that there have been things that they haven't been able to control and that they might need to let go of that. But we'll be focusing on what they can do, how they respond to the circumstances that they've found themselves in. So we'll be asking them questions, we'll be clarifying their needs and adjusting, as I said, our pastoral care programs to match what the students are telling us that they're after. You know, for example, if they're feeling like they're unable to manage, we might be asking them to put together checklists so that they can tick off some things that they've done throughout the day or the week in their studies and their learning. And that way, when they look back at those lists, they can get that sense of achievement that they've actually been able to manage something in a circumstance that's been really difficult. Of course, we've got our school-based counsellors and the pastoral support teams in each of our schools, typically a homeroom teacher or a pastoral care teacher who knows the students really well. Year coordinators and leaders of wellbeing will be working with their year groups. And we'll be accessing external programs like the BU programs from the organisation Beyond Blue. And we'll be also linking with external providers, Headspace, for example. And we also would urge parents to contact us if they think that there's something that they've noticed that's unusual or a little bit different about their daughter or son when they've returned to school. Email us through the Compass program or platform, or certainly just give us a call and leave a message, and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can.
James, we hear a lot about students who've missed school, but there are some students who have actually flourished in remote learning and have enjoyed having a more directed approach to their learning. How can we make sure those students are assisted in the return to the rigour and the discipline of the school day?
I think we'll be acknowledging that it takes time to get back into the swing of things. All of us have lost a little bit of our school muscle memory, and of course at home that means we'd be asking parents to re-establish those good bedtime routines, monitoring screen time, getting off the blue screen before sleep, and all of those sorts of things. But I suppose one of the key things that we've acknowledged is that a lot of us have learned new skills. For example, the flipped classroom. Lots of our staff are videoing lessons and asking the students to watch it before they actually cover the content in class. So there'll be a lot of things that we'll be able to do that build on the students' capacity to be a bit more independent in their learning.
James, the next few weeks are likely to be characterised by a lot of pressure for our Year 12 students who'll find themselves back at school and with their teachers before the beginning of the HSC. What will these coming weeks look like for our Year 12 students?
Well, Tony, the first thing we've been letting them know is that they've been gifted time. Students would always say at the end of the HSC, the one thing that they'd love more of is time. Now, they've got a little bit more of it, certainly not perhaps the way we'd like, but it certainly means that our staff who know their learners, who know their students, are going to be able to offer them targeted classes, prepare them for exams, do exam practices and give the students feedback. We'll be practicing wearing masks because we know that the students need to complete their exams wearing masks. So obviously we'll be wearing masks in class as the public health order asks us to, but we'll also be doing it for longer periods of time to get them into the swing of things for the actual HSC exams. We'll be schooling the students in how the exams will be run, what rooms they'll be in, the check-in process, and all of those sorts of things to make sure that they're familiar with it and that when they come to those exams beginning on November 9, that they're well prepared in the curriculum, but also the way that they're going to sit these tasks.
James, have you got some tips for how parents can support their senior students at this time?
Oh, sure, Tony. It's always a good way to do it in an unobtrusive way to speak to young people. Utilise the afternoon walk with them or the driving lesson they're doing. Ask them questions about how they're going. Listen to the answer. Go on the journey with them. Certainly, it's always good to be doing an activity with a young person when you're talking to them about a potential problem or issue, particularly if you can sit beside them, walk beside them, and talk about the problem that's in front of you rather than between you. So you set up that really good dynamic of talking about the issue rather than face-to-face and thinking that the issue's between us or the issue's with them. Be there for them. They're going to have lots of different moods. They'll be calm, they'll be frantic, they'll be stressed, they'll be laid back. All of those things are really normal. So take that sense that they're going to be okay and reassure them that way. And that there's lots of different pathways post the HSC for students that have got different sorts of goals, whether it be university or trade or workplace and training. So the school's there to help them with that. Their careers advisors, year advisors again, and our counsellors. So let them know that despite no matter what happens in the exams or their results, that there's going to be a pathway for them. The literature also tells us that students want their parents to actually parent them, not be their best friend. So in that way, it would be a good idea to set boundaries around what they're doing and how they're going with their time and what they're spending their time on, but always a good thing to remember to leave a little bit of flexibility in that so you don't paint yourself into a corner. One of the things we like to say to students is you can view the world as the glass being half full or half empty. One of the things we like to remind students is that you don't have to worry about that because you can refill the glass, whatever the circumstances. Have confidence in being their parents. the best thing you can do is being present to them, being with them, and understanding that your love for them is unconditional.
James, so thanks so much for sharing that great wisdom. It's reassuring to hear a great school principal like James talk so calmly and honestly about how our schools care for and guide each student as they move through the final years of school and into further study and work.
Learning from home has certainly been a whole family endeavour, even for our secondary students. Parents have been working from home while their children are learning from home. So having to share devices, office spaces, bandwidth, and the never-ending demand for more food has really been a challenge. We also understand that many of our families have been dealing with the very real pressures of job loss, family illness, and possibly separation. If your secondary student is studying the HSC, the pressure of remote learning was increased by changing timetables and uncertainty around the ability to complete certain HSC tasks. Getting back into a school day routine will be a challenge that the whole family will need to face together. So to finish off this evening, we're going to speak to Melinda Melham, who's the Assistant Principal at Mount St Joseph Milperra and the newly appointed Principal of Freeman Catholic College for 2022, who is also a parent with students studying in our secondary schools, including a son studying the HSC. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Jacqueline. Good evening, and good evening to all our families and students watching from home. How are you this evening?
Really well, thank you so much. Look, Melinda, we just want to know, what are we expecting in terms of how families will return to school?
I think we can plan to have some mixed feelings about going back, a bit of a combination between excitement and also a little bit of nerves. It's been a long time since our sons and daughters have been at school. And whilst there's those elements of being on a summer holiday or a Christmas holiday, the nerves are there because we haven't seen our friends for so long, which would be the normal difference from being at school. We haven't put the school uniform on for quite a while, and we haven't sat in a classroom. School sets a really structured routine where remote learning offers that flexibility. So while this may have suited some students, the transition back to this degree of normalcy is going to be challenged, but it's really important that we recognise it can also be managed. It is important that families begin this preparation now to start to ease back into that routine. And it's similar to what James and Kevin has been saying already. We need to re-establish those really good sleeping patterns, going to bed at a reasonable time, setting an alarm, getting back into that rhythm of what it will be like when we do return to school, going back to using your school diary, those normal things that we take for granted, start to reintroduce us to that normalcy before we walk back in those school gates. Planning for the next day, scheduling when tasks are due. We may not be packing our bags yet, but just getting into that rhythm again. As we've said before, social media has become the way that we've interacted with our friends, but this is about to change, and our dependency on that needs to start to change as well. We need to start resetting those boundaries. We need to refocus, because the focus now is back on learning and the learning environment back at school. This will be difficult for some people. The length of lockdown has exacerbated this a bit, and may have even disengaged some students from their learning because it's been such a prolonged experience. So now is that time for that deliberate refocus back, so the transition isn't so big. So parents starting to remind their sons and daughters about, putting the phones away and how they're starting to focus on their learning and re-engaging with their timetable. Begin to set goals. Try your uniform back on. Those little things are going to make that transition back to be gradual and not such a big change all at once.
I think, you've really hit the nail on the head there. It will be gradual and it won't be a flick of a switch. How can families manage that, being that we can't expect we're going to be able to just drop ourselves straight back to where we were 106 days ago?
And I think that's the same for us as adults as well, moving back into our workplace. So the way that we're starting to think about that is also what our children are going through. So I think we need to be patient and we need to be very present about what our children's needs are. I deliberately say we, because this has to be a partnership. The communication with your sons and daughters' teachers or their year coordinators or house coordinators is really going to help that smooth transition. Each person will find the transition to be very different. I think it's important to realise that our sons and daughters have been listening to the media and to updates now for about 3 months. We need to make sure the conversations that we have is not catastrophic and doesn't add to any anxiety, but starts to become quite pragmatic and practical about how we return to normalcy. So as a parent, I'm really careful that my worries for my children aren't passed on to them, because they have their own worries and they don't need that anxiety added to it. So we need to start having those conversations about returning to school. We can't avoid it. It's there. We need to start having those conversations. And I think we need to not just ask what is their worries, but what are they really excited about? So we have that balance. I know in my home, each of my children, their preparation for return to school is very different. So I have a daughter at university. I have a son in year 12 and one in year 10. I'm very conscious that my son in year 12 is excited about going back to school. He's aligning his confidence with the exams as re-engagement with his peers and also interacting with his teachers. So I need to support that so that confidence isn't interrupted by any possible anxiety. So we need to make sure we're aware of that. I think our advice needs to be really practical about meeting their needs. And when they do return to school, I think we also have to ask them, first of all, what went really well today? Because we can fall into that habit of what I was worried about or what didn't go well, but really start to change that conversation about what did go well and maintaining that, because that's when we can help them problem solve and help them return to normal.
Absolutely. And it is that return that we're sort of all focusing on. So I guess in terms of the last 18 months, really, what can families take from the remote learning experience and our experience of COVID that will really enhance their participation in their students' education? Because we know that will be key.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a firm believer that you need to balance your perspective. So we hear, all the worries about lockdown and what we've missed out on. And yes, there has been, it's been really hard. It's been really challenging, but there's been some wonderful learnings as well. And I think we need to keep that balanced perspective. On the days I've worked from home, I've had the opportunity to learn about how my daughter and my sons learn and engage at school that I would never have had the opportunity to do previously. I now have great insight about how they learn, how they problem solve, how will they engage in discussions with their teachers and with their other peers. I've seen how adaptable they are, and I've been surprised because I was worried about some things, but that adaptability has come through. I've seen where they struggle, and I've also had a chance to see where they've excelled. The other great benefit for our children is they've had a chance to see us as parents in a different way. Working from home means that our sons and daughters have seen how we manage our work-life balance. They've had a chance to see how we problem solve, how we engage with colleagues, develop time management, how we're resilient, and how sometimes we can have some challenging conversations. They've also seen us then support them, and they learn their work ethic and they learn how to manage and problem solve just like us. This insight is priceless. I've come to realize as well that our current year 12s, even year 11, are really prepared for uni or TAFE or post-life school. My daughter's in her second year of uni and she has spent all but 3 weeks at home studying online. Our year 12s are already doing this. They have been doing this now for quite a significant period of time, and they've made this transition. They did their final assessments online and they managed it really, really well. So I think that we need to balance those positives with them as well and say that they're already showing this supported independent learning, and that this will be no different when they move into a different sector next year. We need to be really careful not to tell them they're disadvantaged, because we don't want them to think that, and we don't want them to believe that. They have learnt skills and confidence that we never had the chance to do, and we really need to affirm them for that. And the other thing is, I've come to really value when I work from home the time I get to spend with my children that I may not have done before. We all seem to congregate outside and have lunch together and go for walks. And my sons have even tried to teach me how to play the drums and guitars, and had great delight in my inability to pick up their skill that they take so easily. So I'm really protective of this time now, and I'm determined that our new normal takes some of that learning with them, because we need them to really affirm themselves for how well they've managed these last 3 months at home.
Oh, the new normal. What a great note to finish on. Melinda's perspective as both a parent and a school leader has been really helpful. Melinda reminds us that while remote learning was certainly a challenge, there were some really important lessons which will prepare our students for similar challenges in their work and study beyond school. So thanks, Melinda.
Jacqueline, you've got an 8-year-old at home who learns the drums as well. Are you planning on taking that up?
Sure, I'm giving it my every best shot. I'm not sure I've got her rhythm. That's my problem.
You're ready to beat some drum.
That's right.
Okay. That was fantastic. We've just heard from 3 really great educators in our system, and our schools are filled with fantastic teachers and leaders, and they're just like the ones you heard from tonight. Just before we finish, we thought we'd do one more poll, and we're interested in knowing what you'd like to know more about as we return to school. Once again, on your screen, you can click the areas you would like to feature in our future communications with you, and they're COVID-safe measures, academic intervention programs, student wellbeing and support, learner profiles and styles of learning, and the positive lessons from at-home learning. So let's look at what people are telling us here.
And we really do use this sort of data when we're planning what sorts of things we're talking to you about and the things that go into our weekly messaging and our information with our school leaders and also with our students. So it's helpful to see there. It's the wellbeing support that people would like to see feature in some of our future communication.
Really strong, and you can see the academic intervention programs, and that's very much linked to wellbeing. And then we've got the COVID-safe measures. I think the sort of explanation of where we're at with COVID-safe measures should be very reassuring for our parents. And as you can see there, it's pretty even.
Yeah, and I think the key is for all of these that our schools work exceptionally hard to make sure these are targeted to the students and the school communities that they serve. So if at any time you've got questions about these, please don't hesitate to ask.
That's it for our Term 4 Family Forum. A special thanks to our guests who joined us tonight, Kevin Carraher, James Corcoran, and Melinda Mellom. Thanks so much for watching and participating, and remember that if there's anything you'd like to know, your teacher and school principal are only a phone call away. There is a very short anonymous survey about this forum that will follow, and we'd appreciate your feedback. Good night and God bless.